Thanks, colleagues. I consider this as one of the most important task forces of our T20 presidency. Extremely interesting task force. As yesterday Samir mentioned, we have tried two things in this T20 presidency. One is to reduce the number of task forces. Earlier, we had seen several task forces, but as Fabio mentioned, we have stuffed in a lot of sub-points in each task force, and it has happened here also. The second important thing is to reduce dominance of economists in the group and in the working. This task force, for the first time, opened it up for philosophers, for sociologists, and for many others who have been contributing to the way our life should be governed, the way we see future, and the way we see the new development paradigm that we are seeing in a sort of commitment, collective commitment for sustainable development goals. And we already have one task force. So this morning over breakfast, all the co-chairs of the SDG task force and the task force on LiFE, we met and we discussed how future research should go forward, how Brazil and South Africa may take the message forward. And this is something important because there are several intertwined ideas within the concept of LiFE, which are important for us to see in terms of we going forward in a way that is the future of the planet. And I think yesterday Sherpa was absolutely clear in terms of how we go forward. When we talk about life or lifestyle for environment, many people remind us in terms of their reactions. Once a US president mentioned in his speech that our lifestyle is not for grab. I think time has come that we realize that lifestyle amendments are important. And it's important for G7, it is important for G20, and it is important for everyone. But there is also an issue that countries which are working on minimal level, what about their lifestyle? People are still struggling with minimum resources for life, minimum access to resources. For them, change of lifestyle or the idea of communicating to them about change of lifestyle would not mean much. So we need to bring in this whole question of inequality. And that's why we had several philosophers in our group who could convince in terms of how the idea of ethics is important, why value systems are important, and why future sustainable development, future sustainable consumption. So the SCP, the concept that has emerged, and in the statement that we have issued just now, you would find several of these issues which are covered in a major way. In the T20 communique that was released yesterday, you would find we have talked about global partnership for sustainable lifestyle. We have talked about mainstream nature-based solutions, nature capital valuation, going beyond GDP and measurement of well-being, bringing in the idea of new development paradigm and the high-level principles of sustainable development. We have also talked about systemic transformation and what kind of approaches are needed, how we bring in preventive healthcare, traditional system of medicine, addressing gender gap, but also women-led economic development, circular carbon economy, green bond. These are all one set of issues which have figured. The second set of issues which are equally important, they emanate out of the whole question of ethics in terms of access to finance. How we make what yesterday Sherpa mentioned in terms of African countries paying far higher rate of interest when they have to access capital. And that's where the infrastructure financing is important. In the communique that has come out yesterday, we have mentioned about continuation of the work that was launched in Italian presidency of Global Infrastructure Observatory. And that I think is important in terms of we consolidating our approach on how issues should be taken up for infrastructure. And several of the European countries require new approach in infrastructure. Several of the Asian and African countries also need that. Latin America is also exploring. So I think the whole urbanization process has to have a new approach on the way we look at infrastructure, fresh approaches on innovative forms of funding. As our T20 chair mentioned, the independent task force that was there for recapitalization of multilateral development banks, regional development bank, it has come out with the first report. The second report is awaited. And some developments on the finance track are extremely important. Amar is here. He has been contributing immensely in this area. And that is also related to the way we look at the development of local economics. We have also, in our communique yesterday, we have suggested to have a project development facility for small cities, for climate adaptive infrastructure that has to come up, and also for disaster resilient infrastructure. And this, I think, is important in terms of how we look at the process. Sometimes people are asking questions whether LiFE would be continued after Indian presidency. What is it that would happen? I think we should desist from that kind of speculation, because it is for sure, it is the spirit of the concept that matters. The phraseology, the terminologies, the lexicon are presidency specific. The presidencies are working in specific contexts. But the point that Prime Minister Modi made in terms of LiFE at COP26, and that's why it has become part of Indian priority, is largely because if you see the statistics, India is among those countries where emissions are very low. And the emissions are very low because of the lifestyle we have adopted. We are now trying to ensure that more and more people in India come out of poverty. And the recent report on multidimensional poverty has shown that people have come out of poverty, but without compromising standard of living. And that's where we need to focus on new technologies and sustainable production. So this is something which is important on all different aspects of how we see life. Whether we use the word life or we say lifestyle for sustainable development, or we use whatever phrase we like. But lifestyle amendment is important. It is important to bring down the carbon footprint. So my panel is here. Each one of them have contributed immensely in terms of how we have looked at the question. They come in from different backgrounds, and I'm so privileged to have excellent panel. I think that one can expect with full gender balance. So this is a great panel. Please give a big hand as we start. And Gladys, I would very much like to start with you. My idea is that in the first round, each one of you, please give us in 2 minutes your overall statement in terms of how you look at the concept of life and its future. So Gladys, over to you. You have traveled the most. You just won the award yesterday. So congratulations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sashim. My main worry is about for the future is what type of order we are going to think about under present circumstances, taking into consideration that we are living in a polycrisis or a transition or an interregnum, as some scholars call the present order. And so, who will arbitrate this order and for what development? So, going to development, going to the issue of development, it is very important to see the increase of inequality in the last 2 decades, and also the climate urgency in terms of the physical limits of the planet. So increasing inequality and climate change and climate crisis, for me, are two main things to take into account. So if we are thinking about changes, we have to think also at different levels of changes, because at the domestic level, the domestic level is not enough. We have to think about micro changes and global changes at the level of the international system and the regional system. If not, any effort could be diluted. And if we think of changes, we have to be aware of the asymmetry of responsibilities and of compromises. Even if we sit all at the same table, we have differentiated responsibilities and differentiated vulnerabilities. And it would be a complex work, try to find consensus at the present time, where we sit at the people sitting at the table, or the governments and the enterprises, the stakeholders sitting at the table, had different interests, and to a certain extent, although it is proved that the globalization has its wrong effects on the world and societies, it's very difficult for those who have created, to a certain extent, globalization, could quit from the present situation.
Thank you. Thanks, Gladys. Nora, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Sachin. So what is life from and forward? What is life after the T20? Both life and lifestyle for the environment. So I think for life, and as you mentioned, Professor, it's not necessarily the term, but also the context and how it was brought around. And life, if we think of the SDGs, life tackles at least 5 SDGs. I can name, quality of education, SDG 4, SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy, SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities, SDG 12 on responsible consumption and production, and this actually is at the heart of the LiFE concept, and SDG 13 finally on climate action. And it's important to pursue all these SDGs as well as the full set of SDGs. And some of these are actually prerequisites to others, like climate action is important, but also SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy is a prerequisite for almost all the other SDGs. So they're very much interlinked, and the pursuit for all these SDGs need to be balanced and frame our efforts for life and other sustainability measures. And if we look at the G20 and the G20 commitments that are reflected in the communique, with regards to life, since 2017 at least, there's been the launch of the G20 Resource Efficiency Dialogue to promote sustainable consumption and production patterns. We can track that since 2017, and then the following year, 2018, there was a re-emphasis on energy efficiency and resources efficiency. And in 2019, the introduction by the Japan presidency of the circular economy and resource efficiency, so reduce, reuse, and recycle. And in 2020, the introduction of the circular carbon economy, adding the 4th R, removed by the Saudi presidency. And we saw the continuation of the circular carbon economy appearing in the G20 communique in 2021 and also last year in 2022. There was also a mention last year specifically of including environmentally conscious lifestyle. So that's a perfect segue for India to add its flagship of lifestyle for the environment.
Thank you. Thanks, Nora. You're absolutely right. The pivot is SDG Goal 12, and then others are interwoven in the concept of life. Absolutely right. Thank you. Can I turn to you, Dilantina?
Professor Chaturvedi, yes, we are all talking about this life, and there is a special focus about life for environment. What does it mean? Is it mean that the lifestyle we are adopting present is not sustainable? And can't we achieve the SDGs with the present lifestyle we are adopting? Need to think. I would like to focus your attention on sustainable consumption. Also, our task force 3, life, resilience, and values well-being. So, are we heading to a better life? Even are we satisfied with the present lifestyle we are adopting? It is always grabbing. If we open our eyes or if we open our mind, it is always grabbing, yet we are not satisfied. We are not resilient, and that's why all these hazards and destruction, everything happens. And if you think about the way our consumption, and are we taking, if you think about at the micro level, at individual level, are we taking a grocery bag to the food city or the supermarket? And how many of you willing to drive your car? Even the passenger is only one person. These are the places that we need to change. And these are the root causes for even the climate change. Yes, the climate change, we need to address this globally, but we need to add locally. So I prefer this lifestyle for environment. Why? Because we know that we can feel that the lifestyle, we all, no matter rich or poor, developed or developing countries, are unsatisfied, always chasing after. So this is a point to think. We need to think about our lifestyle, whether this is sustainable, are we consume sustainably, and can our consumption, can our lifestyle reach the SDGs? We need to start at the micro level. So this is my insight.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks. This is absolutely fascinating. Your emphasis on individual choices, I think amazing. Thank you. Thanks. Now let me bring in somebody who has been part of the negotiating team of India and has seen life from various perspectives, from many eyes and from many country submissions. So over to you, Ms. Eenam Gambhir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Chaturvedi, and thanks to ORF for this amazing panel that we have put together. So I think, some of the colleagues and fellow panelists mentioned about life is, being something that is touching upon many SDGs. You mentioned about the root cause situation, just before. And I think I want to sort of give a little bit of perspective on how life for us, as we were crafting our G20 presidency priorities, was very central to very big ideas that we were putting on the table. And on one of the fundamental, and colleagues may have heard this from several of our senior colleagues. Yesterday, Sherpa and Minister before that, and several other colleagues, that India has put development at the heart of the G20 process. And I think when we do that, we also have to naturally look at its interlinkages with other major agendas of the world. So one of the most important focus of our presidency was to look at and to put together climate and development agendas in a manner that we can look at it from an integrated perspective. The development working group this year focused on that, not only in the action plan for the SDGs that we adopted, because we have a very strong focus on transitions, and transitions not only from the perspective of energy transition or because there are many other transitions, but also from the perspective of how to actually ensure that they are just for everyone all around the world, and we truly really leave no one behind. And I think and then the other outcome that we adopted in the development working group was lifestyle for environment, high level principles. Now, and I think this is something that is very fundamental to the agreement that the international community has achieved, most importantly in 2015. And Professor Chaturvedi, you must be, sort of remembering this. When it was adopted, the SDG agenda, it was very clear that it is an integrated agenda and it is indivisible. And the integrity of that was very, very fundamental to the achievement. And since then, it's interesting also that we adopted the Paris Agreement around the same time, very important agendas coming together. But since then, we saw the political commitment to the integrity of the 2030 agenda come sort of wither a little bit, and certain SDGs became more important. Climate action is SDG 13, right? So, and there are so many others, as Nora spoke about. But, SDGs we were picking and choosing. We're like, okay, let's focus on this SDG and let's make our financing, focus on this SDG and let's put in resources here. And I think that is where somewhere, I think we were, and especially this was felt in developing countries quite a bit, because in developing countries on ground, we feel and perceive all of these agendas together. We don't see them as separate, because on the ground for us, and a lot of developing country colleagues here would agree, these are happening at the same time. If you make progress on development, you develop resilience, which then helps you in tackling with climate change. And I think, vice versa in a way. So the integrity of it is fundamental. And I think that's what we decided that we are going to bring back very, very importantly. And how, this was so therefore life was a very fundamental pillar, and it's also very closely linked to the presidency theme, which is one earth, one family, one future. And we want to sort of speak of it, perhaps the idea of one earth, one future may be easier to understand, but the idea of one family initially, was looked like what do we really mean by that? But I think when you look at life, and we'll speak about it a little bit more, I'm hoping, is that looking at the last mile on a lot of these issues mean that we need to bring all stakeholders together. We need to create this web of policy exchanges, incentives, disincentives, and I would say, even the incentives part is, looking at it from a very economic perspective. But I think really it has to be an all of society effort. So I think for us, lifestyle for environment, therefore, is not something that is a nice to have on the side, individual action. It is very, very crucial part of the climate action, because unless we focus on the demand side, our emission reduction discussions are always going to be incomplete. That's what we feel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ms. Eenam Gambhir. I wanted to ask you a question, but before that, I'm reminded of this distinction that we very often talk about of Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it is important to keep us reminded all the time as to what is the difference. And the difference that I see is in terms of a shift from quantitative targets to qualitative targets. So in MDGs, you had the idea of how many schools, how many nutrition programs. Things have changed. What food security focus was. Now we are talking more about quality of education, quality of food that is being supplied. And that's why your point in terms of an integrated approach to the life. Because if you are in fields, in agriculture, you need to have a right kind of water mix. You need to have right kind of fertilizer mix, the chemical mix. You have to have right energy sources. And that has to be equitably distributed so that food insecurity, poverty related, so goal 1, goal 2, goal 6, and then it has to be healthy, so goal 3, it has to be gender specific, so goal 5 comes in. It has to be innovative, so goal 8 comes in. It has to address the inequalities that are there, so goal 12 comes in. It has to protect biodiversity, so goal 13 comes in. So this way, the idea of one goal brings in 5, 6, 7 other goals, and they are all intertwined. And somehow the development strategy that we adopted in last all these years, they have completely overlooked this balance. So the effort that has been made with the idea of LiFE is to bring back focus on what we all dedicated ourselves to, the idea of Sustainable Development Goals. So fantastic. The first round was very productive. Now let me ask individual questions, and let me begin with you only, Ms. Eenam Gambhir, about the idea of negotiations. How it happens, because when we are talking about SDGs and their integrated approach, everybody in this room would agree. But what happens inside the negotiating room when we have only the track 1? Here people are from civil society, from think tanks. So we all think of betterment for everyone. But when it comes to negotiations, I don't know what happens. Tell us something.
We just actually in June, finished a very intense couple of months of negotiations on the high-level principles, and I encourage all our colleagues here to take a look at that document because it's very comprehensive. And I think initially when we started with this, there was some questions about the fact that, okay, so if it's about individual action, we can all do it in our countries. Why do you think there is a need for a global idea, and it's going to be only about individual action, and how much the government is going to really come in and dictate in a way, so to say. There were all these concerns that we heard from colleagues around the table in the G20. But I think if you look at the document that we have crafted, and this has really been a very, very enriching exercise for the discussions, is because we are not only looking at lifestyle for environment from the perspective of individual action, but we are also looking at it from the perspective of ensuring that the basic needs of people whose lifestyle is, and you mentioned about that, is still not there yet, to be taken care of. And I think this is very important, especially when we look at it look at an initiative like this from a global perspective. Because there are a lot of principles when we discuss on the development agenda and climate agenda. My colleague mentioned about common but differentiated responsibilities that govern some of these exchanges, and it's fundamental that they are held to account with any of such global agenda. So the first principle of but we've adopted lifestyle for sustainable development. The name is, changed again as a result of negotiations, but was about interlinkages between climate and development, recognizing that as a fundamental principle. The second is about basic needs, and it has the reference to common but differentiated responsibility. So we're starting from that premise. And then how do you really make lifestyle for environment sustainable in itself, right? We can talk about individual choices wherever the choices are easy and they exist, but in certain cases the choices may not exist. So can we create ecosystems which will promote, and especially when we are talking about building cities for the future, creating infrastructure, can we look at waste management projects? Can we look at transport? Can we look at urbanization from a holistic perspective, and many other literally infrastructure sectors that need to be looked at if we're really serious about making it from a bigger perspective. The other aspect was sustainable production. So I think that's where the industry, and all of that come in. And then there was this aspect of how do we create an international cooperation on these issues. So I think, we made our effort of developing a G20 consensus on this initiative, on lifestyle for environment, lifestyle for sustainable development, as an effort to ensure that it really fits in what we consider is the missing piece in the response currently that we're discussing on the climate action, because energy sources changing from a particular to another is going to solve one part of the problem, but unless the root cause of that energy consumption, which is actually an unsustainable consumption, as Prime Minister calls it, is changed, we're not going to get to where we want to. So that's
Thank
where I
you.
would stop.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Nora, you have been talking about circular carbon economy, decarbonization. Your policy briefs have been talking about it. How you see this fitting in the larger strategy that we are discussing here today of LiFE?
Thank you, Sachin. So it's important to recognize continuity, sustainability, and inclusivity if we would like for every proposal and in every presidency to continue. And it's as you said, it's different terms saying almost the same thing. At the end of the day, we are all searching for ways to pursue sustainability, environmental sustainability, that doesn't hurt economic development. And the circular carbon economy framework, which was endorsed under the Saudi G20 presidency in 2020, gives that much flexibility because it allows an inclusive approach to energy transition. And this year, under our task force, as a co-chair of Task Force 3, we've tackled this issue of integrating lifestyle for the environment with circular carbon economy at the individual level, because the framework has been applied at the international level, national level, but hasn't really been explored at the individual level, which is the focus really of the Indian presidency, is how can we shift focus to the individual level and allow different policy interventions at different levels really that we elaborate on the policy brief. So you have the individual choice, but you also have the carrot approach and the stick approach. I will leave you to explore this policy brief, but the idea here is to really build on G20 commitments every year and advance it a little bit further in a way that is sustainable, inclusive, and pragmatic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nora. Delanti, you have been working on issues related to food systems, agriculture value chains. How you think they fit in the concept of LiFE, and most of the countries from Global South are working on food value chains. How you look at this fitting in?
Yes, Professor Chaturvedi, but before that I would like to bring a note from your introductory description. Yes, you talk about food security. So food security, accessibility, availability, stability, and utilization. And with that, we are talking about SDG, MDGs. So, but there we address the hunger. Then what about the obesity? Right? A critical issue. So under LiFE, right? LiFE for environment, when we have to see about the hunger, the people who are in hunger as well as who are suffering with obesity. So think a point to think. Right, coming back to the point you raised now. Yes, climate, the agriculture food systems with LiFE. Right now we know the rice, the staple food for majority of us, it means the paddy cultivation, consume 80% of water, 60% of land. But the productivity of it, we have to think, right? So are these cultivation systems are sustainable or in line with the LiFE? So we need to change. We need to go for climate smart agriculture with private partnerships, with research and development and precision agriculture for more production to feed the population. And equal distribution as well, with very efficient supply chains, with efficient cold chains, even the livestock production. Agriculture, livestock production, they feed the population, really important. But on the other hand, contribute to the climate change as well. With a lot of the fertilizer, water usage, all these things, it contributes to the climate change. So we need to think, we need to go for we need to shift these patterns with research and development and new ways of cultivation, bringing technology into the agriculture sector, the supply chains, and make the process efficient and reaching and make them climate smart and productive.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks. Gladys, let me come to you. We are left with 10 minutes and I also want to give Floor a chance. I had thought of third question also of incentivizing private sector, but let me bring you first in. On this whole idea of green bonds that you have been talking, I think somewhere you have also been discussing of connect between finance and ethics. How you see this coming in, and in your part of the world you have seen this more closely, and you have been commenting on that. Your review of South-South cooperation for this, I think, was an excellent review that you wrote. Let me quickly turn to you for a very quick response on this, and then I go to the floor.
Well, if we think of sustainable development and change through consciousness and education, in the meantime, we have to think of how to reconcile ethics with finance. And in this path, taking into account that globalization is becoming increasingly financialized, it's essential to find mechanisms to promote green finance, grants more than credits, and a policy where governments support companies that comply with emission reduction and environmental protection through fiscal measures. In this sense, is that most of the countries that demand financial flows don't have sustainable economy, and they demand a payback, and the green bonds are part of the solution. And in the case of Latin America, and even in Africa, in South Africa, green bonds have been applied with certain success. So this is one point.
Thank you. Thank you, Gladys. Thanks a lot. Let me turn to the floor for very quick observation, clarification. No speeches. Just introduce yourself. Anybody? Yes. Yeah. Right.
Thanks. Dan Bannock, University of Oslo. Fascinating discussion. The concept of LiFE, as I understand it, is particularly interesting because it's coming from India, it's coming from the so-called global south. My question really has to do with the global public goods discussion. How do you see that playing out, and to what extent can LiFE actually help in the achievement of global public goods going forward? Thank you.
Thank you. I can take one more. Do I see any hand? Yes, please come close to the mic.
Thank you. My name is Sanjay. I represent Manipal Academy of Higher Education. My question is to Joint Secretary G20. Does the differences in the sanitary and phytosanitary agreements and technical barriers to trade impact the decisions we take at supranational level for LiFE as an entity?
Hi, Hyunhee Ban from UNICEF India. So we talked about the demographic dividend and the opportunity in India and many countries around the world, including Africa. Can you elaborate on the role of children and youth in the LiFE for the G20 and beyond? Thank you.
Very good. So 2 questions are addressed to you.
Thank you for these questions. So I think, to the first question, I would say, and this is something that I was thinking to address, when we were discussing, we would have discussed the incentivizing discussion. So LiFE looked at from the perspective of, within a country and, inter-country sort of transnational aspects is really looking at a multi-stakeholder approach, which has to have every stakeholder come in and play their part. Because if the idea here is, also if you look at it from the perspective of, and I think these are discussions that have been going on for some time, is does our economic model or the way we understand growth, right? We had to actually, when we were discussing this within G20 and also beyond that, had to speak about life as pro-growth, because the general understanding of, or the traditional understanding is that, well, you grow by fueling consumption, or you grow by, boosting exports and exporting to countries who are consuming more. And I think we are very well aware this is actually the flaw in our, I wouldn't say the understanding, but in the models that we have followed, which have led us to this point. So there is no way a discussion on something so fundamental and something which touches the last mile will not address some of these big discussions. And that's where my the point about the first question comes in now, where of course the discussion on what the global public goods really are, the definition, all of that. I mean, this term has been used multiple times, including the G20 documents, but the countries use it in a very diffuse way. But the basic idea that there are goods or there are aspects of our exchanges with each other which are really there for everyone, and therefore should be governed or should be handled from that perspective, is also comes into question, because then we don't look at these things from a purely transactional perspective. We look at these things from a perspective of how to find development models, how to find trade agreements, how to, which do not leverage trade-offs, which actually focus on synergy. So our attention actually has to shift. So we hope that the discussion on lifestyle for environment will actually fuel that path to looking at, and it'll not only help in climate action and development, but also transitions, which is actually the action on ground discussions that we're having on climate. So I mean, this is not in some ways the second question I haven't answered directly, but I think this is something that is a sense of
Thank you. Thanks a lot. You have answered all the 3 questions. But let me give 1 minute each to our panelists. So Nora, can I start with you? Just any last minute observation?
Thank you, Sachin. I think it's important that we keep in mind the previous G20 commitments as we go on from one presidency to another, just to preserve the continuity, sustainability, and inclusivity of climate action.
Thank you. Gladys?
Just to use this opportunity, great opportunity from the southern countries to contribute to a southern voice.
Great. Thank you. Delanti? Final word.
Sustainable consumption. So before before doing any action, we need to think twice. Is this sustainable, good for the future? One earth, one family, one future. So our action would be the consequence or the result for the future. So we need to think about it.
Thank you, Delanti. Big hand for my panel. Excellent, excellent views. And I think as we close this point that I think all of them have made and very forcefully articulated by Ms. Eenam Gambhir. Life is for growth, and that I think we should realize, and we should articulate the process not as something that is going to hinder our urge to expand, and this whole the neoliberal approach that has come up in our economic framework of consumption-based economic growth. I think that's where course correction is needed, because resources are really limited, and that is not to influence anyone's lifestyle, and some countries are thinking that the idea of life is to threaten their lifestyle. It is about the course correction at the end of production. This morning, I think Dr. Khosla very rightly articulated that life is about the course correction for production and for livelihood security, and I think these two concepts are important for us to go forward. And the other point that you made, I think that trade agreements without trade-offs, that I think is also very, very important in terms of how we go forward. I think, Dilanti, your point in terms of how individual choices are made, I think that is extremely important. Gladys, your point on ethics and finance and the way they are closely linked with the fragmentation in the finance sector for accessing credit. We need to minimize it. And that's where I come to Nora, where she very forcefully articulated that the concept of life is intertwined with 6 other goals. And that, I think, is something that we need to realize. So it is not about terms, it is not about a specific lexicon, but yes, the new development paradigm would have to evolve new lexicon to go forward. It doesn't matter which country it comes from, but the future presidencies would certainly be sensitive. Last point that we could not discuss, and I think is extremely important, I had mentioned it in my initial remarks, is in terms of measurement. How do we measure this? And that's where the well-being index that we are working on in the task force, and we are going to take that forward, is something which is extremely important for us to see how we go beyond GDP for measurement. And we reduce emphasis on monetary value of development. We need to bring quality to it, and that's where our indicators should also reflect that. Some work is being done. Our communique today, which we have just released, the Task Force 3 statement, is forceful enough to explain that. I'm sure all of you would gather a copy of this. And as I said, this is the first multidisciplinary effort and I think we had the record co-chairs in our task force. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat for excellent support through the 2 great representatives whom I considered as co-chairs in our task force. I think this was a great move. So thanks to Secretariat and to the panel, a big hand to them. And I'm right on time. Thank you.